Welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and I am streaming live, obviously, from the Team Needham abode. And if you watch every once in a while, you'll get to see a cat run back and forth. And this is a kind of a makeup edition. I kind of double booked last week and couldn't have Shawn on last week. So he's going to be back on our podcast today because this is his second time on our podcast. And we are going to be discussing ADHD, so adult attention deficit disorder, hyperactive disorder. And it's something that has been traditionally in kids. And I actually screwed that name up. It used to be ADHD. Or ADD, and then it went to ADHD, and it used to be just in kids, and now it's in adults too. And we're going to be talking about non-pharmacological or non-drug interventions with Shawn Casey today. Super excited to have him on the podcast again. So Shawn, welcome to the show.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure talking with you and focus on proactive health, non-prescription needs.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your history of treating ADHD with non-pharmacological interventions.
So it's kind of fascinating. So my background is I'm a registered dietitian. I'm a movement coach. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really high level athletes, Olympians, Olympic gold medalists, professionals. And when I really started to dive into it really in depth, it was probably about 12 to 15 years ago. And it came out of a need for the clients I was working with for their sporting performance. And anyone who's been on Adderall or Vyvanse can relate to this. Is one of the effects of it is it really kills your appetite. So, Shawn, I know you're a huge biker and you know how much calories you have to burn through. So I was having clients who were trying to get between 5,000 to 7,000 calories in during the day to fuel their training. They were on these medications and they would get 2,000 calories in the day. And they're like, man, I am jammed. I have zero appetite. And so that's when I really started diving in and figuring out, like, what is going on? Like, these guys, if I go on a huge endurance run or bike or whatever, my appetite is really through the roof. And so that's when I started going into realizing how these medications, which are kind of basically just amphetamines, are absolutely smashing the appetite. So that's when I started working with them. How do we get people off ADHD medication so they can actually train and perform at their, caliber there? And it's really interesting because now that I've been able to work with a lot of people to get them off medications, their spouses will come up to me and they're like, that was the best thing you ever did. Because they're like, our husband or our wife, they'd be really great. They get on the end of their dose and all of a sudden their mood, they do this, they become irritable things. And they're like, I feel like you've given, Joe or Susie back to me, their personality. So that's when I really started getting into it. When I really got excited, it was, again, kind of like you do as a functional pharmacist. You're just trying to solve solutions or provide solutions to issues that, people that we're working with are experiencing.
Yeah. And the diagnosis, it was when I was a kid, when I was in pharmacy school, first it was ADD, and it was attention deficit disorder. And then they changed it to attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And when I was in pharmacy school 30 years ago, it was basically Ritalin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
but it's the same thing as Adderall, methylphenidate. It's still an amphetamine-based, molecule, so it does the same thing. And so the thought is that there's even though they're like amphetamines, which usually rev people up, they have the opposite effect in people with ADHD, supposedly. Now, here's my opinion as a pharmacist, and I've thought this for 30 years. And it used to be just kids, and then it went into adults with ADHD. I think it's a complete BS diagnosis, personally. I think there's way too many people on it. When we look at the history of ADHD in children, it was usually in younger boys that had ADHD. Well, you lock a boy up in a room in a public school for 7 hours a day and don't give him a bunch of exercise and recess and physical exertion, you bet he's going to have ADHD. I would too. So I think it's actually a diagnosis that's really totally overblown and totally kind of made up so big pharma can just have another drug to sell. What are your comments on that?
No, I think so much the medications right now, and this even in general, I feel like there's so many medications that are basically just trying to cover what's basic nutritional deficiencies, basic movement deficiencies going on. I mean, and they've even done research in this with, adolescents who are on, who have been diagnosed with ADHD, is having groups going outside, running around, things of that nature, and then coming back, and almost all the time their symptoms greatly decrease. And going back to you were saying when you're youth running around, was when I was going to school, this is 20 plus years ago, 30 years ago, now that I think about it. We got
You look
outside.
way too young to be in school that long ago.
I know. What we were able to do was we had recess 3 times a day, especially when I was lower than 6th grade, morning, afternoon, and lunch. So I was talking with my nephew a few weeks ago, and we were just kind of joking around. I'm like, man, are you killing it outside with basketball at recess now? And because we're finally getting Wisconsin, we're finally getting the warm weather. And we were just kind of talking. I'm like, well, how much recess do you actually have? And he's like, well, if I eat fast enough at lunch, I can at least have 15 minutes afterwards. I'm like, whoa, like double negative. I'm like, one, if you're eating fast enough at lunch, and B, you only get 15 minutes.
Right.
I'm like, I think there's a really strong correlation, or like gym classes we were talking about earlier, is you don't have physical education nearly as much. And I think that all plays a huge role why we're seeing so many attention issues, in the diagnosis and everything, in the literature, is we're just not giving the basic tools for people so they can have that high attention, the brain chemistry, everything working together.
Absolutely. And, I know when there was some stigma attached to ADHD diagnosis with children. So the one that took over actually after that was, well, we don't want to give them ADHD diagnosis because there's a stigma with that. So, what we're going to call it? We're going to call it bipolar. So then all of a sudden these kids had bipolar disorder, and they would put them on SSRIs and basically just, and it's like, is that what we want? Is that what do we want children just checked out? Is that what we want? No, we want children with energy. And if they have too much energy, go exercise. Right?
Absolutely. I find I love movement. I even think about just when you can't focus. Even now in daily life, if I'm having trouble like thinking, or I find that my mind is starting to dart, the first thing I usually do is just go out for a walk or something where I'm moving again. And that's even for people who maybe if you're not even diagnosed with ADHD, just when you're having those things where you can't focus, is getting those breaks in the day. I don't think the body was designed to, I could be wrong, I don't know your opinion, but I don't think the body was designed to sit at a desk, stare at a computer for 8 hours straight.
No. I mean, you look at, generations and generations and generations ago, if we were hunters and gatherers, or even, in an agriculture society, I mean, we were outside doing some kind of activity most of the day. And, so to be locked up in a room in front of a computer all day is not, what is in our biological genes. So tell us some interventions that you like. You mentioned movement. So how could we put that into our daily routine?
Yeah. I think an easy thing to do from the movement side is simply every 3 hours, just even if you have to set an alarm on your watch, whatever it is, to have a go off. Even if you're feeling totally fine, I always think about like preloading. That way you don't have to dip into the reserves that often.
Right.
Is just moving 15 minutes for every 3 hours that you're sitting down. That's kind of my thing. I find that helps a lot of people, for either those who are diagnosed as ADHD, those who don't. Almost everyone comes back and like, wow, that really helped me focus later in the day. Another basic one is just get enough hydration. This may sound really weird, but one of the things that I always do is making sure that you're getting enough water, enough electrolytes during the day. Because I find a lot of people like, yeah, my symptoms were good in the morning, but man, in the afternoon, I started doing, fishtailing all over the place. And I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, well, how much fluid do you drink? And they're like, not much. I'm like, well, we know that it's very easy to dehydrate, especially as it's getting warmer out. If you're having trouble focusing, that could be as simple as being dehydrated. I find when I start adding that into a lot of people, they found that their memory was better. They had less headaches. They were able to focus better significantly during the day, where they found that was good as well. And then, although it's always boring because people will come to me looking for like supplements, because again, sports nutrition, I think like the flash, the bangs, the whatever. And I always go back to, are you getting your baseline nutrients in? If we're trying to put medications on top of a faulty system to start with, it's just a Band-Aid. So, and this is even interesting. If you look at studies, that what they've shown are people with ADHD versus control groups, almost always they're deficient in magnesium, zinc, copper, selenium, and iron. So that is
basically minerals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that's where I put a lot of focus, is making sure that we're getting the baseline nutrients that are in. I think that is key. The other thing that I always think about too, which is fascinating, is fish oil. So we know how big of an impact that omega-3s have on the brain. What they're showing is people just taking either they're eating more fish, be it salmon or whatever, or if you're not having anchovy pizza 5 nights a week, taking a fish oil supplement, significant improvements in score. One of clients I was working with, I was talking with her earlier today, and we her son started, taking omega-3s, and she's like, Shawn, it was crazy. He did his, I'm drawing a mind blank on the exact test, but it's basically one of the standardized tests that they do for this last fall. And then they did it again this spring, and they're like, everyone was shocked at his improvement relative to what the norms were expected. And she's like, the only thing that we implemented was we started getting fish oil, omega-3s into his system on a regular basis. And so that's what I was thinking about.
His cognition was better?
His cognition, his rates of like impulsivity, attention, like across the board. The test that they were doing kind of to standardize the ADHD, or in terms of the diagnosis, they found that all significantly improved.
Now, with omega-3s, we really shouldn't be that surprised, because, our brain is concentrated with omega-3s. So why should we be surprised that omega-3s help our brain function, right?
Yeah. It's so neat. And, the other things that are always fascinating too and I do this with a lot of clients, I do a pile of breath work. I find breathing exercises, especially, if you're trying to calm yourself down, more kind of the slow inhales, exhales. But you can also do more of, it was kind of popularized as the Wim Hof method, but where it's more that fast, aggressive, where you're trying to help with alertness. So, I always think about, if you don't have alertness, if you don't have motivation, it's going to be hard to find direction to really zero in on things. So I find, doing deep breathing, I know there's been different studies that have kind of verified this, as well as, breath work can support attention in different populations. Anecdotally, with a lot of clients I work with who have had issues with ADHD, it's kind of a really nice natural stimulant to kind of build up that the endorphins in your body, building up those neurotransmitters that support focus.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to show one of the comments we got from one of our viewers, and Ryan Oldman, thanks for the comment. I think Ryan, I actually commented on this, mentioned this before I saw your comment. So, because it looks like your comment came in like 4 minutes after we started. So, Ryan Altman is actually a teacher too, Shawn. So
very cool.
And he's convinced that ADHD isn't even a disorder anymore. It's simply a holdover from the times of hunter-gatherers, when over 7 to 10% of the population has it. It just is a fluke. It is called the hunter versus farmer hypothesis. Most or all humans were nomadic hunters gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years, but this standard gradually changed as agriculture development in most societies and more people worldwide became farmers. Over many years, most humans adopted farming cultures. Now, I kind of said that farming was, I talked about farming too, but I don't think it's that. I thank you for your comment, Ryan, and I agree with that when we get into an agriculture society, more of a bigger farm-based agriculture society, it was different than hunter-gatherers, and we maybe weren't moving as much, but we were definitely moving a lot more when we were farmers than we were sitting in a classroom or, being sedentary, watching video games or watching TV. So I agree with your comment, Ryan, and thank you for that. Again, movement's the important part,
Mm-hmm.
and not being sedentary. And keep going on your. We talked about breath work, talked about minerals. One thing I wanted to comment on too, the hydration thing. I'm glad you mentioned electrolytes. As you know, Shawn, for decades we've been telling people to drink water, drink water, drink water. So there's so many people that have a water bottle always at work,
Mm-hmm.
or wherever they're at, and they're always drinking water. But in reality, they're diluting their electrolytes.
Yeah.
So if they don't have electrolytes in their water, their sodium is going to be low, their potassium is going to be low, and maybe not super low or below normal in a lab, but it's going to be suboptimal. So electrolytes are very, very important. Jen and I talked about this, I think last week when we talked about preparing for summer. I'm a big believer in element electrolytes, LMNT.
Those are great ones.
Yep. But I'm not super picky as long as you do something. Noon is also good. They're easy to travel with. Noon tablets. There's some other ones. Do you have any other comments about electrolytes?
Those are usually the ones that I focus on. I like LMNT. They're a great brand. They know they do some really great testing. And the thing that I like about them, and I should mention, I don't have any affiliation with them. So if everyone's like, "Oh, he's totally a shill for LMNT," no, I don't have.
Right. I have interviewed Rob Wolf, but I don't have any affiliation.
But I always tell people, I'm like, the elements are basically your electricity. That's what's helping with a lot of those impulses. I'm like, if you pull the plug on that, it's going to be trouble. And it's always interesting because now that we're getting into the summer months, I'll have people come up like, man, I just feel like brain fog. I feel really off. And I'm like, well, it's because of your diet. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, you eat clean of a diet. Since you're not eating all the processed junk food, I'm like, you don't have much natural sodium in your diet. So when you are sweating a lot of it out, it's easy to drop it down. So I find adding electrolytes into people's diets really helps them feel a lot better with things across the board. So I echo that thought, and I'm glad you're on the same page.
Yeah. Well, what are some other foods that we can talk to people about that's good for brain health?
Brain health. So again, we mentioned the fish, in terms of the omega-3s. The other one, again, that's went down our diets is dark leafy greens. So you think about dark leafy greens are a good source of magnesium. Similar to pumpkin seeds. Magnesium is responsible for over 600 different reactions in your body, including, a synthesis of neurotransmitters. Same thing with, energy production. If you look at the classic Krebs cycle for energy production is if you don't have magnesium, that ATP becomes extremely challenging to produce. So I focus on there. I think
let's not forget that magnesium is a calming mineral.
Yeah.
It relaxes blood vessels. It relaxes our brain. So, perfect for things like ADHD or to help us for sleep or insomnia, things like that. Just help calm us down.
It's funny you mention that. So when I'm educating, I always tell people that magnesium is the therapist of your body because it relaxes your mind, it relaxes your muscles, it relaxes your blood vessels. Like it just, deflates. So like there, I think in another one too is we're looking at important ingredients for health and wellness is choline. So we know that good sources of choline are like eggs. I think society is finally getting better. For a while, I know eggs, especially egg yolks, were demonized.
Right.
And eggs.
That's a whole nother podcast.
I know that is. We'll do that for next time. But eggs are an amazing source of choline.
Eggs are just let's face it, Shawn. Eggs are just a great food. Period.
Yeah.
They are. Not super high in protein. There's not a lot of protein in one egg. But, they're a great source of protein. They're a great source of cholesterol. We can't live without cholesterol. It's we would die without cholesterol. And when you think about the egg yolk, and we talk about how bad they are, if it is so bad, how come a baby chicken sustains on that egg yolk for a week or better? Why? Because it's concentrated in calories and nutrients. That's a good thing.
Can hear something also that's super cool about eggs. So everyone talks about antioxidants, right? There was a study that came out, I think it was 2014 in the Journal of Food Science, if I'm recalling correctly, But basically what they showed was that one egg, if you had it sunny side up, had the antioxidant level of 2 apples.
Wow.
So if they say an apple a day keeps the doctor away, an egg a day, sunny side up, keeps the doctor away while having like a massage in the evening. Like it's such an awesome food, right?
Well, another thing about eggs too is anybody that is more calorie conscious, which most Americans probably should be because they're not super active. But eggs are very satisfying.
Yeah.
I mean, the satiety in eggs is amazing. I mean, even after a long workout, if I'm eating eggs and sausage, I have a hard time to eat 3 eggs. I mean, because they are you think you can eat a lot, but you just can't because they are so concentrated in nutrients that you feel satisfied.
Mm-hmm. And that's a nice thing. You have 4 eggs, you're at 70 calories an egg on average for a large one. You're at less than 300 calories with 24 grams of protein with
You are full.
Yeah. With a lot of food.
Right. I mean, eggs are perfect. Yeah, about 70 calories per large egg, and 4 eggs is tough for me to eat if I'm eating other meat with it.
Yeah.
So talk about choline. Eggs are high in choline. That's great for brain health. Definitely.
Yeah, brain health.
Go on with that.
Yep. Going forward with the choline. So choline is a precursor to acetylcholine, which is one of the neurotransmitters that goes, between the nerves to help with impulses. And that's why even some of your supplements that I've had good success with for people who are looking to do a little bit more is either like alpha GPC, which is a concentrated choline, or citicholine, are 2 things that have been shown to, help with focus, attention, brain function. So those are really, some of the big ones. Again, your fruits, your vegetables, again, getting those baseline nutrients. So I would say from the food side, from the supplements, that is where I'm always going for, is the minimally processed, trying to not have a lot of the extra stuff into it with there. We mentioned like the diaphragm breathing. There's actually some research too, looking at how does music or beats, affect, attention level. So binary beats, I know, has become popular, where it's kind of like the beats are slightly off, that have helped with folks. I've had different things, again, anecdotal on there, that which has been really impactful. And then another thing that I find, and this is more of just to help keep things organized, I think one of the issues going on is there's so much going on right now in the world, right? Like people are checking their phones 100 million times. I'm guilty of that as well at times. Like I'm get there, but they're trying to do they have so many work things going on. Like there's so much going on, and it's hard to keep organized on things. I think sometimes, again, some people really have trouble focusing on there. So I'm not saying that this is not an issue, but I find just organization. So one of the things I find has worked really well and help people cut back in medications is simply like, okay, on your phone, have an app where you can actually, dial in and put like, okay, at this time I have X, this time I have a Y. That way you feel more organized, because sometimes when you feel inattentive is when you're not organized and you're just, bouncing all over the place. So I'll focus on those type of things. That's more on like a behavioral type side. Again, how can we kind of get the looking at a 360 view? How can we improve the movement aspect of things? Here's the other one, is sleep. If you line up the symptoms of sleep, and chart them down, sleep deficiency, and then you line up the symptoms of ADHD, line them down, it is almost like 100% match. They almost completely overlie each other. So again, we know that sleep, if you're not sleeping well, you could have like the most focused person in the world. You put them on short sleep for a couple of days, they're going to be starting to get scattermined. So I think that is one that gets undervalued significantly when it comes to ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, sleep trumps it all. Sleep trumps food. Sleep trumps exercise. I mean, if you're not sleeping, of course you're going to have ADHD. I mean, seriously, call it what you want, but if you're not sleeping, you're going to have some kind of brain disorder. If you're not sleeping well, and let's just define what that is. And usually experts agree that you need 7 to 9 hours a day of sleep, and I say a day, but that's really at night. Our bodies are made to sleep at night, not during the day. And kudos to all you shift workers out there, policemen, firefighters, nurses, but our bodies are not made to sleep during the day. We're made to work during the day and sleep at night. And if you are having any kind of mental type issues like ADHD or depression or bipolar, name that disorder, sleep is so important.
Mm-hmm. And and that's the interesting thing is you're talking about earlier about the blood levels, like suboptimal, like okay, suboptimal, clinical, things of that nature, and we're always going for optimal. But I think it sometimes gets forgotten is like, okay, maybe this aspect is suboptimal on its own. Yeah, you might not know something, but I think what's happening in today's society is we're suboptimal on sleep. We're suboptimal on movement. We're suboptimal on stress management. We're suboptimal bubble, down the line. It's like, well, if we add up a lot of suboptimals, that becomes one huge deficiency. So,
Right.
and that's when I think what happens is everyone starts looking at things in silos. And that's why when I'm working with clients, and I know you take a very holistic approach as well. And I think that is what we need to realize is, okay, if this is working and it's a silo, here's a silo, here's a silo. Well, man, if we get around the silos, we realize we just have a huge hole in the ground, type deal. And that's what I always want to focus on in each one of these areas. With any clients I'm working with who have ADHD, and that, again, am I going to say everything is going to cure everything? I can't, I can never promise anything, but we can make significant improvements just by ratcheting everything up 5% in its little silo. So no longer suboptimal across the board.
That's a really good point. I've never heard it put that way, but you're right. If you're suboptimal and just, a little bit of everything, then your body is not going to act optimal. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to blindside you with this one because I know you're an expert and I know you'll know the answer. So, and I know it's not always super convenient, especially during the day. But what are your thoughts about ice baths?
I'm a huge fan of ice baths.
And ADHD. I mean, I know you weren't ready for this, or maybe you were. I don't know. But ice baths and ADHD. I mean, tell us about ice baths and brain function.
Yeah, we think about ice baths is like that kicks off kind of that, the fight or flight response with the dopamines, with the neurotransmitters. And the one thing that, with ADHD I was talking about is the low levels of dopamine. And that's why with even like those amphetamines, why they're effective is, well, they get those kind of ratcheted back up. And so that, although it seems counterintuitive, why, can kind of help some of those symptoms. Well, ice baths are amazing for that. It's like literally that jet fuel for your veins when you get an ice cold bath. So I am a huge fan of being able to implement those type of strategies as much as possible. Here's an easy example. I'm sure everyone has had that day where the water heater breaks and they have to take an ice cold shower.
I hate it.
And
I absolutely hate it, Shawn. I can't do it.
Yeah. And then you get out of it, and for like the next 2 hours, you just feel on point. You feel like you had 2 cups of coffee, right? That is literally what's happening in the body and with everything. Here's another interesting thing on coffee and even tea. I'm kind of segueing a little bit back into nutrients. Just popped my mind on that comment is they're actually finding that caffeine. So I think sometimes people look at caffeine as like this horrible thing. And I think it can definitely be abused. So I'll be the first one to say that you can definitely abuse coffee or caffeine. So I don't want to undermine it. But if my alternative is, hey, either I have to get somebody on on an amphetamine type stimulant or have them have coffee, there's actually some research showing that if you have caffeine with theanine is an amino acid found in tea leaves that naturally has a relaxant benefit. They're finding that it's improving symptoms of ADHD without necessarily all the side effects of, some of the other medication options. So, and I know like, if you look at coffee, for instance, that's coming from bean, you're going to have a lot of antioxidants in it. So when it's not abused, I'm actually a fan of using that from time to time.
Well, and caffeine, pharmacologically speaking, has a amphetamine-like structure. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't be surprised that it could work like some of those amphetamines, and used in moderate doses in a coffee or a tea is not going to have the side effects as you would about a pharmacological dose of a methamphetamine type or amphetamine type drug like methylphenidate or like Adderall, so to speak. So yeah, that's a great point. Okay. On the opposite side of ice baths, and I just have not been able to embrace them yet. I mean, like you talk about water heaters, it's like, we worked really hard in this country to become a society where we have hot water anytime we want it. So it's hard for me to just jump in an ice bath. I get it. I've been following Wim Hof for a while now. for about 2.5 years or so. I'm just not there yet. I do understand the benefits, but you know, I haven't embraced that yet. Now, on the opposite spectrum, what about saunas?
I like saunas from the health benefit side of things. I can't say I've necessarily looked super in depth in terms of saunas with ADHD. It looks at clinical studies there, but what I know is saunas, I want to say they trigger the release of BDNF, which was brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps with, you know, processes with nerves, with brain function on there. But I'm also a big fan of saunas. Where I got really into saunas was with one of the clients I work with, lives in Denmark. And so I've spent, 3+ years of my life in Denmark. And there they do the contrast all the time, where they're going from their saunas, literally walking out into the sea where it's like 50 degrees and back and forth. So I've become a huge fan of saunas, even just from an exercise standpoint or from a movement. Not that I'm saying taking a sauna is going to have the same effect as going on a long bike ride or lifting weights or whatever. But what they're showing is a lot of the health benefits from exercise, not to the same level, but you can get some of those same benefits just from sauna work. Mood wise, usually people feel much more chill when they're coming out of a sauna, you know, type setting. So
it's another modality.
Yeah.
You know, I think sauna, steam room. I didn't say I specifically said sauna, but I think steam rooms can do the same thing, and they do. You know, they do make us sweat, and there's some benefits from just sweating, and that's one of the benefits we get from exercise. But like you say, it's not the same thing, but it is another modality that we can use to work our way towards optimal health.
And where it can be really effective too is, again, it's all about baby steps. If you have somebody who's, you know, it's not realistic for someone who hasn't been active for 4 or 5 years. So we're talking about how inactivity, you know, is one of the main reasons for ADHD. Well, we're also realistic. I don't expect somebody to go from, you know, sitting on the, you know, being more inactive on the couch or whatever it is, to all of a sudden they're being an Iron Man. So I was thinking, how can we help somebody along that pathway to get to that end goal? And saunas are fun. Or here's even another one with a lot of athletes I work with. Let's say if they have some sort of injury, where I've had clients where all of a sudden they kind of go into that, like their mind is darting all over the places when they can't be physically active. And all of a sudden it's like, you know, I think we all have seen where people, even myself, if I get hurt and I can't be physically active, like I just even notice my own mood kind of like, you know, falls over. Where if you can provide that sauna and it's kind of that assurance, like, hey, you're getting some of these same health benefits. I mean, which again, there's physiological studies to verify this, but even just on a one-on-one anecdotal basis, like I feel like I'm doing something and I feel like I'm getting that sweat. So I kind of have those same sort of, you know, if I want to call it endorphins, whatever you want to call them, I have that same sort of a feel. So I find from an attention standpoint, from a mood standpoint, even though I can't, you know, lift weights, run, whatever it is, I still feel like I'm doing something. I'm accomplishing something that moves me, you know, further down that path of, you know, health and performance goals.
Well, let's face it. Who cares? The studies say if it makes you feel better, great, do it.
Absolutely.
You know, and yeah, I like the idea that you say baby steps too, because I think some people they overthink exercise, and we just have to make it. I try to tell them all the time, Jen. I try to tell them all the time that, you know, it's simple. Start with something simple, and really, in reality, and you might speak to this as a coach, that, you know, somebody that's sedentary, it's really easy to make them get better because you're starting from nothing.
Yeah.
So just do something. Walk 5 minutes a day. Do a little bit of. Do some push-ups. You know, just some body weight stuff, body weight squats. I mean, just do 10 of them. Get up in the morning, do 10 body weight squats, do 10 push-ups, call it a day. Yeah. I mean, you know, and then just progress from there. It's tougher when you've already got somebody that's, you know, having health type of issues and they're working out 10 hours a week because they're some kind of endurance athlete or something. And, you know, that, you know, they might actually be working out too much possibly. It's harder to, it's easier to start from nothing than to get the last 2 to 5% of somebody that's an athlete, you know?
No, 100%. And that's the big thing. And I find this is, you know, I'm working with, you know, younger coaches who are coming up or things of that nature. It's kind of like, okay, because they're like, oh, we got to move them a little bit out of their comfort zone, which I 100% agree with. But what I see all too often is if this is the comfort zone, like right here, here's our little circle, instead of going just, okay, we just need to be a step outside the circle, all of a sudden they throw them outside their comfort zone, like 5 miles or 5 years down the path. And that's when somebody gets injured. They have that setback. And all of a sudden, you know, there's that sense of shame, like, man, like I can't even do this or that.
Right.
That's why I was encouraging people. I'm like, we need baby steps. We create those small wins. Those small wins start to add up over time. And at the end of the day, we're going for a lifestyle change. You know, we're not trying to go from 0 to 100. We're trying to go from 0 to 5 to 10 to 15.
Right.
That way we make sure our engine doesn't fall apart beforehand and we have to go back to square one.
This is awesome. So as we wind this podcast up, Shawn, tell us what you have a passion for.
My passion is really to be able to recalibrate healthcare. I'm very passionate about getting people at their top level, whether you're an Olympic athlete who's going for the gold, or if you're someone who's simply like, hey, I just want to be able to run around with my kids, you know, things of that nature. I love human performance and how can we truly optimize human performance from both the physical side as well as the mental side of things.
I love it. So tell people if they have any questions, how can they get a hold of you?
All right. So for anyone who wants to get a hold of me, I'm really active on Facebook. My name is just Shawn Casey, SEAN. CASEY. My website, if anyone wants to check me out, is caseperformance.com. So that's CASE performance, PERFORMANCE. But like I said, I try to respond to everyone who reaches out to me on Facebook. I love interacting. I love learning from others, and just collaborating and moving forward together.
I love it. Well, you've definitely helped realize our goal, Shawn, of educating and empowering individuals to take charge of their own health.
Absolutely.
I really love interviewing you, and I always learn something from you. So I appreciate it. And you know, this subject was your idea. So you know, I love when our guests think of new ideas that we can educate people on. So if you have any other ideas, Shawn, we'd love to have you on again. So
absolutely, would love to be back.
Awesome. So tomorrow, let's tune in 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We will have Jen Van Dewalter on our show, and she's going to be she's a pharmacist, and she's going to be talking about the corruption in big pharma. You'll want to tune into that one, Shawn. Although
Absolutely.
You already kind of know those issues, but it's going to be a good one. So don't miss out on that one. And as always, listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Thank you, Shawn.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.